Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Santa Barbara Nutrients YouTube channel. Today we have a very special guest, Nikki Gepner, who will be speaking to us about sodium and kidney disease. Nikki is a registered dietitian, certified specialist in renal nutrition, and a functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner. So she has a lot of expertise in this area. And Nikki has a really deep connection and personal story to metabolic health. So when she was younger, she experienced some symptoms of fatigue and pain. So she really started to incorporate lifestyle changes to reduce the stress, improve sleep, and changed her diet to help address these issues with her digestive tract and improve her overall symptoms. So now she maintains these dietary and lifestyle changes, and she focuses her expertise on metabolic health for those with kidney disease. What I find very fascinating about Nikki is that she's really trying to revolutionize the nutritional approach for those with kidney disease, and more specifically, polycystic kidney disease. In particular, Nikki has been in the field of nutrition for over 18 years and has spent her entire career working with people that have kidney disease, including those with PKD. So Nikki really knows the ins and outs of nutrition and kidney disease and the latest research on PKD as well. Nikki, she works at the Polycystic Kidney Disease Swedish Medical Center in Seattle, Washington, and helps those with PKD incorporate dietary and lifestyle changes. Nikki was actually very vital to the development of the top 8 dietary and lifestyle changes for those with PKD, which is a handout that lives on the Santa Barbara Nutrients website, and we'll have a link below in the comments. Nikki also works with Dr. Amro, who is a nephrologist in Seattle, Washington, and also aided in the development of this top 8 dietary and lifestyle changes for PKD handout that we have. Both Nikki and Dr. Amro really focus on a comprehensive approach for individuals with PKD. The Polycystic Kidney Disease Swedish Medical Center in Seattle helps individuals to address multiple disease aspects, including physical and nutritional aspects. And I really believe that the key to their patient success is that ability to start with an individualized plan for each patient. Nikki is also the owner of the Northwest Functional Nutrition, which is located in Bothell, Washington, and is part of the Santa Barbara Nutrients Practitioner Network. So if you have PKD and you're looking for an experienced renal dietitian, I would highly recommend meeting or at least looking into Nikki Gepner. We will go ahead and we'll have her link in her website posted below for anyone to check out. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and go into our interview with Nikki Gepner, who will be talking about sodium and kidney disease. Start off. So we hear a lot about, high sodium intake and how this is known to kind of worsen the progression of PKD. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about, sodium and how that relates to general kidney health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and thank you for having me. So, with sodium, it impacts PKD in a couple of ways. And so, in general, when we have a higher salt intake, if people are sensitive to salt, which majority of PKD would be, then that will increase blood pressure. So, high salt intake can increase blood pressure, and that high blood pressure is a contributing factor to kidney disease in itself. That's even outside of PKD. So, high salt intake for somebody that has kidney disease can worsen their kidney disease. With PKD specifically, there's an added effect of when we have high salt intake that it actually increases what's called vasopressin. It's a hormone in our body that controls blood pressure. And when that hormone is triggered, then it binds in the kidney, and that actually increases the risk of cyst growth in the kidney. So that triggers a pathway that increases the growth of those cysts. And then we know with PKD that the more of those cysts that form, the bigger they get, that decreases kidney function.
Mhm. So there plays a role basically with higher sodium intake and cyst growth, it sounds like. Um,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so, you hear about hypertension a lot too, and that kind of relating to a high sodium intake. And most people with kidney disease have hypertension. Can you describe why those two also kind of are connected?
Yes, absolutely. So with salt intake, there's our body has these sodium and potassium pumps. And so what we found is that when people have a lower salt intake and a higher potassium intake, that actually helps to contribute to more normalized blood pressure. So not necessarily low blood pressure, but normalized blood pressure. And when people are eating a very high salt diet, and particularly high salt with not enough potassium, that increases that risk for higher blood pressure. So there's a variety of mechanisms in the body that impact that. That's one of them. The vasopressin is another one. Our body wants to very tightly control the levels of sodium in our blood. So that's very important to the normal functions of our body. And so it will do what it needs to do to balance that out. And in that process, for some people, that can contribute to higher blood pressure.
Okay, I see. So you kind of brought in the potassium as well too. So
Yeah,
for what does that, if somebody has to limit potassium per se, and given a
right.
high potassium level, how does that kind of affect then, right? So the sodium, if they're taking
Yes.
less in.
Yeah. So that's where limiting salt becomes additionally important. So when somebody reaches the point where they cannot eat a higher potassium diet, then really we have to just stick to the sodium limits there.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we're
Which can still be
talking
beneficial, I
Right,
should say.
right, right. Exactly.
Yes.
So it's kind of a twofold process there. So if somebody is, how much sodium, I guess, can someone eat as part or consume as part of a healthy diet? And does this change if someone has kidney disease?
Yes. So the general recommendation would be around 2,400 milligrams of sodium a day. And that has even, if people can stick below that, even in PKD, that's been shown to be beneficial in reducing the risk of progression. However, um, when somebody has kidney disease, it's typically recommended to stay below 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. So, oftentimes, what I'm recommending is to be somewhere between like 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams a day. It's the recommendation depends on the research that you're reading. But no matter what, we know that if you can be around 2,000 or less, that can make a huge difference. And just to give some perspective in what that means in terms of food, so you get around 23 to 2,400 milligrams of salt from just a teaspoon of table salt.
Wow. So
So it
that's
can add up
extremely
quickly.
small. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is there a danger? I guess we talk about having too much sodium. Is there a danger of consuming too little sodium?
Well, so it is hard to consume too little sodium if you're getting enough food to eat in general. So all foods naturally have sodium in them, and our sodium needs are actually very low. And so is it possible to get too little sodium? Yes, but that would only happen if you literally weren't eating. And then, of course, there'd be a lot of other issues related to that.
Right, right. Okay, that's good to know then too. Because sometimes we go on the high end spectrum, and then people are wondering, well, what if it's too low, right? So I guess if we're kind of talking about sodium, and I'm gonna just go ahead and have you share kind of a nutrition label so we can give people some idea exactly about what that looks like and how people can navigate and actually determine how much is in a specific food.
Yeah. So the labels that we have pulled up here are for chicken broth. That's an ingredient that a lot of people use, even when people are doing most or get most of their food from food that they've cooked at home. Chicken broth is a common ingredient that people might purchase ready made. So I wanted to use this as an example. So the one on the left is a standard chicken broth. These are actually both from the same company, but one is a standard and the other is their low sodium product. So you can see here on the left that for a cup of this chicken broth, you're getting 570 milligrams of sodium. So the things that I'm looking at when I'm looking at a nutrition label and trying to consider, okay, well, how much salt am I getting? How much of this particular item can I actually eat in a given, serving in a given meal? I'm going to be looking at what's the serving size and how many servings are in this particular container. So for instance, in this case, 1 cup, and then there's 4 servings. However, if you're likely to consume 2 cups of broth in a particular meal, then you would want to double that, right? So now we're well over 1,000 milligrams just for one ingredient in one meal. So it can add up pretty quick. Versus if you were to use the low sodium one, that one's just 40 milligrams for a cup. And so still that leaves room to still have salt from some other foods.
Mhm, mhm. Exactly. Yeah. And I really like how you highlighted the serving size, right? And so I think sometimes it's hard when we pick up a food and we look at the label and we're like, wow, here's 40 milligrams, right? That's maybe, classified as having low sodium. But if we're consuming the whole container, right, there's 4 servings in here. So technically,
Yes,
we're multiplying this by 4. So it's
exactly.
really important, like Nikki referred to, is we need to look at how many servings we're also eating as well. So it's great.
Absolutely. And
Um,
another thing I like to add too is putting this into context for how much sodium somebody may be aiming for in a meal. So if we're thinking of around 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium for the whole day, and somebody's eating, let's say, 3 meals and a snack, you're probably aiming for around 400 to 500 milligrams or less sodium per meal. So that's another context that's helpful to go into when looking at the labels and deciding what might be the most helpful product. And another thing that often comes up for people within reading labels is, well, do I look at the milligrams or do I look at the percentage? And I really encourage people to look at the milligrams because the percentages, and it mentions this at the bottom of labels, they're based on a certain number of calories per day. So the percentages don't apply to everybody. And again, it's in context to how much are you having per meal and what all is part of that meal, right? So you could have things that are all lower percentages, but if you eat enough different things, that can still add up to a lot of salt. So I do encourage people to look at milligrams. Yeah,
okay, perfect. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for explaining that too.
sure.
So this, obviously is going to be based on how many calories somebody is consuming. And that's probably, is that based off the average of, everybody hears 2,000 calories per day? Is that what
Yes,
this is based off of, Nikki?
it
The
is.
percent? Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's another good thing too, right? Some people need to consume more calories. Some people need to consume less. And so really this percent does not apply to everybody. So a lot of people hear low sodium, high sodium. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about those differences and what that actually means for milligrams.
Yes, absolutely. So this gives some examples of what you might see on the front of a label. So it's that first thing that people notice, oh, it says that it's, very low sodium or reduced sodium. That must be a good option. I'm going to go ahead and grab that one. I still encourage people to look at the back of the label, which is the first part of the label that we were looking at, where it says exactly what's in that particular food. And the reason is if we look through here and we have all the different examples of how something might be labeled for sodium on the front of a container, and it says salt sodium free. So that means that it has less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. If it's very low sodium, that means it has 35 milligrams sodium or less per serving. Low sodium, 140 milligrams of sodium or less per serving. Reduced sodium, this is where it gets tricky. Now, this has at least 25% less sodium than the regular product. So, if something starts out very salty, and ham would be a great example of that, 25% less is still really salty. And so, it doesn't tell us really how much is in that product. We still have to look at the back of that label and see the milligrams. And with that in mind, too, if people are at a deli counter, for instance, you can always ask the person at the counter to pull the full label for you as an option. And then light in sodium, it's at least 50% less sodium than the regular product. So again, that's all relative to where it started. And then no salt added means they just didn't add extra salt to that food. So it doesn't mean it's salt free, it just means they didn't add any extra.
It seems like a lot of foods, right? Trying to sell, right? And so what they look at,
Yes.
it's gluten free and it's low sodium and it's all of these things for people to automatically be like, this is a healthy option for me. And
Yeah.
so I really like how you kind of separated these two. What you'll see on the food label versus actually what is that connection and to milligrams, or how much does that
Mhm.
actually equal? So looking at the front, great, but it's always looking at the back of the label. Is that correct, Nikki?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly. Exactly. Yep.
perfect. Yeah, these are great. This is super helpful. And then we'll have these as links at the bottom of this video too, just for reference. Um, so let's do a visual kind of learning example too. I think this is going to be super helpful for people when, maybe they're building a sandwich or they're looking at something during the day and they're wondering how much does this entire meal have for sodium content. I think it's a little surprising. So we'll go ahead and we'll have you talk a little bit about this salty sandwich.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I like to use this as an example because sandwiches are one of those things that people don't traditionally think of as a salty food, but it can add up really quickly depending on what you're making that sandwich with. And so in this example, the bread itself, with two slices of bread, that adds up to 400 milligrams, which is not uncommon. Amazingly, a lot of breads are fairly salty. So it's another one of those foods that if you're not making it yourself, and knowing exactly what's going into it, double check that label to see how much has been added. Cheese is another one. Now, this is a slice of Swiss cheese, which is actually lower salt as far as cheeses go. So this is only 55 milligrams, but a slice of cheese could even be upwards of 200 milligrams, just depending on the type. And then with ham, it's not unusual for you've got about three slices of ham here to be upwards of 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And so, even in that example, if you were to buy reduced sodium ham, usually those are still 500 milligrams for a serving. So, it can still be pretty salty. And then mayonnaise, depending on the mayonnaise that you purchase, some of them have a fair amount of salt as well, and some of them aren't too bad. So it's really just about double checking those labels and choosing the lower salt products or making things on your own. So that ham could be leftover chicken from dinner. Um, it could be you could make a black bean patty left over from black beans that you used to make tacos the night before. So there's lots of ways that you can make a sandwich with a lot less salt as long as you know what's going into it. But yeah, in this case, you can see this is over 1,500 milligrams of sodium just for one sandwich, and so that's already over your whole day's worth if you're aiming for the lower end of salt intake.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing to see how things really add up. And when we think of sodium, it's really a preservative for a lot of the food. So like canned fruits and or canned vegetables, primarily lunch meats and cheeses, and anything really in the frozen aisle typically has a lot of sodium in there for preservatives
Yes.
as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, this is a great visual component. I really like this because theoretically you've already met it, with half of an actual meal during the day, right? Because typically with a sandwich, you'll have some vegetables or something else with it. And
Yes.
that's not even counting, breakfast or dinner either, if you're doing three
Right.
meals a day.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So let's kind of dive into, now that we talked about, sodium, sodium labeling, why individuals with kidney disease and polycystic kidney disease should limit their sodium intake. How about some sodium tips for people to kind of, if they're really looking now and they're like, I've been consuming a lot of sodium, how can I really decrease the amount that I'm adding to my meals?
Yes, absolutely. So there are lots of ways that you can add flavor to food without salt. And so I put them into a few different categories here. Using sour and acid, particularly if you enjoy those types of tastes, can be really helpful. So that could come from lemon and lime, orange. You can use the zest, which gives its own flavor, and the juice. Vinegars can be helpful. So, those can be great for making marinades in conjunction with maybe lemon, lime, and or orange juice too. You can use it to make salad dressings. Plain yogurt works great as a condiment as well. So, it has that kind of tangy taste. And if you add some herbs to it, you could make some great dressings, great dips, and again, some great marinades with that. And tomato lends, it's sometimes we think of tomatoes as sweet, but it also lends some acid to a dish too. And so that can add quite a bit of flavor. So lots of options in that category. For spices, a lot of people don't know about smoked paprika. It gives a barbecue flavor. So you can make a salt-free like barbecue rub using smoked paprika, maybe some cumin and onion powder and garlic powder. That's absolutely delicious. And cinnamon can add some natural sweetness. So you may have this in some other videos, but for some people with PKD, they may be choosing to um, eat more moderate to lower carbohydrate. And so finding some ways to add some natural sweetness to food can be helpful too. And then being able to do that without salt, cinnamon would be one of those ways. And then I would say too, not to be afraid to use cinnamon for sweet and savory things. So I've used cinnamon when making chilies, and it can add some great flavor to that. I've used cinnamon sticks to make broths. So if somebody wanted to make their own, chicken bone broth, you could always add a cinnamon stick in there, maybe some cloves. That can add tons of flavor without salt. Um, I listed here some blends and brands that a lot of my clients have enjoyed. So there's the Trader Joe's 21 Seasoning Salute. Mrs. Dash is a common one. Table Tasty. I like Table Tasty because it's very finely ground. So Mrs. Dash has kind of more of a coarse grind to it, and that's great for cooking, great for making dips. Table Tasty, because it's more finely ground, is nice to use even after cooking. So you could use it just to add to something you're about to eat. Penzeys has a whole line of salt-free spices that are amazing. So if people are looking for ways to make cooking more convenient, they have things such as, like salt-free taco blends that could make throwing together a dish really quick and easy, but also flavorful. And then Savory Spice Co. also has some salt-free blends. Lots of options there. And I should mention too, for people, if this is challenging to read online, I do have this particular tip sheet available on my website at northwestfunctionalnutrition.com. So you can always access it there as well.
We'll link that down at the bottom too for people.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that.
Great. Sure, absolutely. And then fresh aromatics. And so we think of aromatics are things that we add to food that have a lot of scent to them, and that scent also adds to the flavor. And so you think of the aroma, right? It has this amazing aroma. So some common blends that we see in cooking would be onion, carrot, and celery. Another one would be onion, bell pepper, and celery. So you might see that more in, Southern cooking or what we consider to be, Cajun style dishes. Ginger, garlic, and scallions. Shallots, garlic, and lemongrass. We might see that in some Asian dishes. And so just combining things that have that amazing aroma and lots of flavor can add tons of flavor to food. And oftentimes these combinations would be sauteed. And so that sauteing process also helps to release some of that flavor. And the same thing can be done actually with spices. So you can toast spices before you cook with them, and that also helps release some of the flavor and actually changes it a little bit. So I encourage people to play around with how they're preparing their foods. It can really change up the flavor quite a bit. Yeah. And then I also included a few links to recipe websites too that have lots of low sodium recipe options and lots of variety in terms of how involved you want your cooking to be. So if you love to cook, if you really enjoy a wide variety of foods. There's lots of options there. If you are really just getting into cooking more, maybe you want things that are a little quicker and easier because you don't have a lot of time to cook, there's options for that too.
Very great, very great. Yeah, this is a really nice sheet actually because it breaks it down into different flavors that people might be looking for in various dishes. So I do like this a lot. Um, I have one question. Are there any spices that some people might need to, it automatically looks like, oh, this is probably low in sodium, such as lemon pepper. Are there, other things that people might need to watch out for that actually contain quite a bit of salt?
Yes, I do encourage people to always check the label because some chili spices actually have salt added to them. Lemon pepper often has salt in it, even though it doesn't say salt anywhere on the front. So, really, with anything, I say double check the back of that label. If it comes with the label, if it's in a package, check it because it's not unusual for things that wouldn't appear otherwise to have salt to actually have salt in it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
exactly. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of these handouts, Nikki. I really appreciate that. I
sure.
think these visual components are really important for people to actually understand. And, this is where I need to start. This is exactly how much sodium I'm consuming, and how can I start to decrease that amount throughout the day. Um, it's been wonderful having your expertise here. Just one more question I have is if someone, this can be a hard change for people, right? If they're really used to their, ham and a lot of things, I guess, that would contain a high amount of sodium. Is there a step by step process that you might recommend for people just starting out?
Yes. So what I encourage people to do, and even along those lines, I work with people too that say, I have all this food, I don't want to throw it out, right? And so how can we work with what they have? And so this can be, starting to bring in more things that don't have salt added. Um, and then with using what they have, let's say, for instance, maybe somebody has some canned beans that had salt, making sure that you rinse them really well. And then adding some of the, picking up some salt-free spice blends or using the spices that you have at home to make some salt-free spice blends to add flavor to that would be one example. And to know that after several weeks of eating low salt, your taste buds start to adjust. And so, what people tell me, and sometimes it can take a little longer for some people, about a month or so, but people tell me that once they've done that, then salty foods taste too salty. So they start to notice the natural saltiness in things and really find that they don't need all that salt to really taste food and to get the flavor that they're looking for. So I mention that because it can feel frustrating at first. People say, oh, but food is so bland. I'm really craving that salt. That's the taste that I really like. But that does get better over time. And you do adjust to eating less salt.
Yeah. And maybe
Yeah.
even, if it's start with one meal, right? Maybe you can just
Yes.
break it down. And I like how Nikki really focused on, okay, 1500 milligrams and breaking that into each meal, right? And so maybe you start with breakfast if you're not doing intermittent fasting, or lunch and you're trying to figure out, this is typically what I have. Let's
Yes.
experiment with, one or two replacements, and that might be easier for people to really start to kind of get in that mindset as well.
Yeah, I love it, Alexa. I think that's fantastic. I think sometimes people get stuck in all or nothing. Like, if I can't meet that goal, then this just isn't working for me. So I love that approach of just starting with one meal, focusing on that, and then starting to spread that habit throughout the day. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Can be very
exactly.
helpful.
Whatever, yeah, exactly. And it's all personal, right? And so whatever works for, or what might work for one person might not work for another. And so I think really
Yes.
speaking with a dietitian and kind of coming up with a plan that works for you, that's very personalized, is a really important first step.
Yep,
Great.
absolutely.
Perfect. This has been super informative, Nikki. Really appreciate you showing up and sharing these handouts for individuals. And it's been super great to have you on here. And thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to do this.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Alexa.
All right.